Joffrey's body is still lying in the sept when Tywin Lannister takes his next grandson for a walk. He asks the boy what makes a good king. Holiness, he suggests. Justice. Strength. Tommen works through them and lands on wisdom. And Tywin tells him he's right. That a wise king knows what he doesn't know, and listens to his counselors, and heeds their advice until he comes of age. He says all this standing over the corpse of the last king, with the boy's mother watching, and he starts the first lesson before they've left the room. It's a tender scene. Tywin is being patient with a child for possibly the only time in the series, and the child is doing well. What people take from Tommen, watching all of it, is that he was weak. He's the nice one, the soft one, the boy with the cat who got played by his mother, then his wife, then a priest, and finally walked out of a window because he had no spine left. He's the Lannister who lost the game by being too gentle to play it. The internet's version of Tommen is Sir Pounce plus a shrug. That reading survives on a technicality, which is that Tommen never wins anything. Look at what he's actually doing in each of those scenes, and the word weak starts describing the situation instead of the person. Weakness implies a stronger option that was available and declined, so go through them. When the Faith arrests Margaery and Loras, Tommen doesn't accept it. He goes to Cersei, then to the Sept, with the Kingsguard, in force. The Faith militant and a mass of small folk fill the steps and the street. To reach the High Sparrow, Tommen has to order Lannister soldiers to cut through unarmed citizens of his own capital, in front of the holiest building in the realm, over his wife. Tywin's entire doctrine says that's how you lose a city. Tyrion says it too, repeatedly, from 100 pages away. The single competent political read available in that street is that force here costs more than it buys, and Tommen makes it and turns around. For that he gets called a coward by an audience that would have called him Joffrey if he'd given the order. Then the High Sparrow works on him, and this is where the weak reading gets furthest from what's on screen. The Sparrow doesn't threaten Tommen. He sits with him. He talks to him about his mother, about faith, about what he owes people. He treats a teenage boy as though his interior life is a serious matter worth an hour of an adult's time. Nobody else in Tommen's life has ever done that. Cersei issues instructions and calls it love. Margaery is warm with him, and the warmth is a maneuver. She's good at it, and she's not lying exactly, but every conversation she has with him is also moving a piece. Tywin gave him one walk and used it to install a habit. The High Sparrow is manipulating him too. He's just the first person to manipulate him by paying attention, and Tommen has no basis for comparison, because he's never received the unmotivated version of the thing. He can't distinguish care from technique. He was never given a sample. So he converts, and the alliance between Crown and Faith gets announced, and the abolition of trial by combat follows, and that decision is the one that seals his mother's fate and therefore his own. Every step of it was reached by listening carefully to a wiser adult and heeding his advice until he came of age, which is exactly the instruction he was given over his brother's body. Here's where the books sharpen things, because George R.R. Martin's Tommen makes the same argument in a much cruder and more legible form. Book Tommen is 8 years old. That single fact reorganizes everything. An 8-year-old king who does what the adults around him say is not displaying a character flaw, he's displaying being 8. Nothing about him needs psychological explanation, and Martin isn't offering one. Cersei's chapters treat him as an object she operates. She gets him to put his seal on things. She instructs him on what to say in council. She becomes irritated when he shows preferences of his own. He's furniture with a signature, and the books hand you the thesis as a household arrangement. Tommen has a whipping boy. When the king misbehaves, another child is beaten for it. That's the machine in one sentence. A boy whose decisions have consequences and whose consequences land on someone else's body. He can't learn from outcomes because he's been deliberately insulated from ever meeting one. Book Tommen's little cruelties are correspondingly childish. He gets stubborn, he cries. He sulks about his kittens. He's happier with Margaery than with his mother because Margaery takes him riding and involves him in things and doesn't correct him constantly. Cersei registers this as a betrayal and a Tyrell plot, which tells you more about Cersei than about the boy. He's a child preferring the adult who is nicer to him. Then look at what the show did. It aged him up. Dean Charles Chapman plays a young man old enough to marry Margaery in fact as well as name, old enough to sit a council, old enough that the audience applies adult standards without being asked to. The show does this for practical reasons. You can't build seasons of political drama around an 8-year-old, and you certainly can't stage his marriage, and the change is defensible on its own terms. But it converts helplessness into a personality. A child who obeys is a child. A 17-year-old who obeys is a weakling. The behavior is identical and the reading flips entirely, because age is what determines whether compliance counts as a trait. The show ages Tommen up, keeps his function unchanged, and thereby manufactures the exact impression of him that most viewers walk away with. So the popular reading of Tommen is not a misreading of the text, it's the text working as built. The show engineered the conditions for it and then spent 3 seasons showing you a boy who never had a move. What Tommen actually is, in both versions, by different routes, is the only person in King's Landing who believes the institutions are real. That's the thing that makes him usable, and it's not a synonym for weakness. Everyone else in that city treats the crown, the faith, the law, and marriage as instruments. Cersei uses the faith as a weapon against the Tyrells and is genuinely astonished when it turns out to have its own aims. Littlefinger treats every office as a lever. Olenna treats a royal wedding as a supply chain. The High Sparrow treats the Seven as a mandate for a political project. Tommen treats all of it as binding. He thinks being king means something specific and that the rules apply to him first. When the faith says the crown must submit to the gods, he takes the claim seriously as a claim rather than assessing who benefits. When he abolishes trial by combat, he does it because the argument against it is good and he was persuaded, which is what he was told wisdom looks like. A man who believes the rules are real, in a room where everyone else knows their tools, is not weak. He's a resource. He's the piece that can be moved by anyone willing to phrase an instruction as a principle, and the queue of people willing to do that never once runs out. And then the show gives him the one moment that the books haven't reached, and it does something the weak Tommen reading can't account for. The sept goes up. Tommen watches it from a window in the Red Keep, and Marjorie is inside it, and so is everyone who spent the last year telling him what to do. He stands there, he turns around, he takes the crown off his head and sets it down, and then he goes to the window and steps out. He takes the crown off first. That's not despair being sloppy. Everything he's ever done was framed as an obligation of the office, his mother's demands, Tywin's tutorial, the faith's claim on him, the marriage. He puts the office down and leaves it on the furniture, and whatever's left after that is the part of him that was never king. The show gives him no dialogue for it, which is the right call, because he's never once had a sentence that was his own. It's also the first decision in his life that nobody advised him to make. Cersei's reaction is worth watching too. She has already lost Myrcella. She has already been told by a witch in a tent that all 3 of her children would be buried in gold, and when Qyburn brings her the news, her grief is brisk and administrative. She has him burned. Then she takes the throne, which is what the fire was for. The last obstacle between Cersei Lannister and the Iron Throne was her own son's existence, and it removed itself. She spent his entire reign trying to make him harder. The version of Tommen she wanted would still have been alive that morning, and she would not have been queen. None of which requires that Tommen be secretly clever, or that the show handled him well. It didn't. Particularly, he's underwritten, he disappears for stretches, and the aging up creates a problem the scripts never fully solve. The books, with an 8-year-old and a whipping boy, are doing the same work more precisely with a fraction of the screen time. But the picture people carry out of it, the soft kid who lost because he wasn't hard enough, has the causation backwards. He didn't lose because he was gentle. He was constructed, deliberately and by named people, to be an instrument that accepted instructions, first by a grandfather at a funeral, then by a mother who wanted a seal, then by a wife who wanted an ally, then by a priest who wanted a state. Go back to that walk past Joffrey's body. Tywin asks what makes a good king, and the boy says wisdom, and Tywin tells him he's right and explains that wisdom means listening to the people who know better. Tommen took that seriously. He listened to every single adult who ever addressed him with authority, in order, exactly as instructed, and each of them was steering. He was an excellent student. The curriculum was the problem.